I'm Aaron Jenkins, a new reviewer here on the Absolute Sounds YouTube channel, and today I'm going to look at a speaker that may appeal both to high-end audio newcomers as well as those enthusiasts who, like me, have to enjoy music in real-world, imperfect, usually shared spaces. And that speaker is the Paradigm Premier 700F. The Premier 700F comes from Canadian speaker maker Paradigm, and the Premier speakers are second from the bottom in that company's 4-model range lineup. At the top is the Persona series, the most expensive speaker in which costs $37,000 a pair. Then there's the Founder series, which maxes out at $9,000 a pair, then the Premier series, and finally the entry-level Monitor SE series, which tops out at $1,700 a pair. The 700F, which costs $1,800 a pair, is the second from the top speaker in the Premier series, just below the larger 800F, which comes in at $2,400 a pair. Below the 700F are 2 stand mounts and 2 center channels for home theater use. Anyway, the 700F is a 4-driver, 3-way design with a 1-inch aluminum tweeter, a 5.5-inch mid-range, and 2 5.5-inch woofers. Both the tweeter and the mid-range are covered by perforated lenses, which Paradigm says increases and smooths output without coloring the sound. Now, the mid-range and woofer cones each receive Active Ridge technology, ART, surrounds for greater excursion, higher output, and a 50% reduction in distortion. The 700Fs also feature a bass port on the back of the speaker, so you'll have to leave at least 8 inches of space from the front wall. That's not much in the grand scheme of things, but it does mean that the front of the speaker will stick out at least 20 inches into your room. The 700F also has 2 sets of binding posts on each speaker, in case you want to bi-wire or bi-amp them. If you use a single set of speaker cables, as I did, a pair of brass jumpers carries the signal from one set of posts to the other. In terms of size, the 700Fs stand about 40 inches high and are 12.5 inches deep, although they're just under 9 inches wide, which is pretty small on the Floorstanding scale. In my mostly off-white living room, these gloss white examples, they're also available in gloss black and espresso grain, were visually very understated and rarely called attention to themselves, which, oddly enough, is also something that can be said about their sound. So what do the 700Fs sound like? My first high-end speakers actually came from Paradigm, and what I remember most about those Studio 60 version 2s was their very warm mid-range. I suspect it wasn't very accurate in the grand scheme of things, but subjectively, it sounded wonderful. The Premier 700F doesn't have that warm mid-range or much sonic coloration at all. They deliver a natural, balanced sound with smooth, easy highs and tight, punchy bass. They handle big dynamic swings without getting flustered, harsh, or edgy. They did take several weeks of playing to break in, so fair warning there. And there are a couple of caveats I'll mention later, but let's start with 3 things the 700F does really well. First up is the 700F's balanced sound. Basically, they sound the same from the top of the frequency range to the bottom, with nothing emphasized or diminished. Everything just sounds balanced and at the same level, the same way that things do in the real world. And this balance stays the same regardless of volume, and I'll mention that the 700Fs are very happy to play loudly, and is part of what makes the 700F sound natural rather than, say, exciting or dramatic or lively. Dynamic contrasts are handled smoothly and easily, and that sense of quickness and nimbleness extends across the full frequency range. Another part of the natural sound is the 700F's clarity. There's no sense of grit or tint to the sound. They're not as crystal clear as the Golden Ear BRXs Tom Martin reviewed here on YouTube, which are special speakers in that regard, but as with that balance, that clarity is just another way that the 700Fs don't call attention to themselves. They step out of the way to reveal what's in the music. Second, and continuing that natural theme, the 700Fs have what I'll call subtle detail, in that, like the even frequency balance, the detail just doesn't call attention to itself. At first, I thought the 700Fs didn't offer enough detail, but I soon realized that things like small musical lines in the background are there, they're just not as prominent as in other speakers I've heard, and maybe understated is the right description here. But while I personally would have liked more detail and maybe a little more texture, Those are just my preferences. What's more important is that the musical whole was still conveyed accurately and enjoyably. And this subtle detail and the overall smoothness of the sound also contribute to the 700Fs being easy and non-fatiguing to listen to for hours on end. I kind of had a sense that the speakers never had to work hard at anything. They just rolled along inside their very wide comfort zone, doing what they did without effort and, again, without calling attention to themselves or to any one aspect of the music.
Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. I'm Tom Martin, Chief Content Officer of The Absolute Sound. I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the Absolute Sound magazine, which we've been publishing for over 50 years. For $20 per year in print, or $10 per year in digital magazine format, you get 11 issues, each with around 100 pages of exclusive equipment reviews, music reviews, and buyer's guides. You also get early access to our 3 awards issues: Editor's Choice, Products of the Year, and Golden Ear. To subscribe, enter this URL in your browser or go to theabsolutesound.com and click on the subscribe button. Thanks, and now back to the show.
Third, the 700Fs have excellent bass performance. They're rated to be plus or minus 3 decibels at 45 Hertz, and in my room, which like many has a bass bump at around 50 Hertz, they delivered solid, satisfying bass. The floor even vibrated every once in a while during bass-heavy track, but most important, the bass is always tight and punchy, never bloated or overhung. Maybe that's those ART surrounds at work. But here's my first caveat. Let's make that solid and satisfying bass for their size. If you listen to EDM, organ recordings, rap, or hip-hop, you'll probably want to add a subwoofer, or consider the larger Premier 800F instead, as the 700Fs simply don't produce the weight, impact, heft of larger speakers with larger drivers. Again, though, the bass they do produce is so good, so high quality, that while I could hear sometimes that the lowest notes were missing, I didn't feel like I was missing out on much of the musical experience, especially with most rock and classical music. Finally, my second caveat. The sound of the 700F is influenced much more by the components it's paired with than are other speakers in this price range that I've listened to. And a quick aside for high-end newcomers. It's easy to think that the speakers are the most important part of your sound system, and in some ways they are, because they produce the actual sound you hear. But in reality, every component matters, and potentially it matters a lot. As but one example, if you're not listening to high-quality, usually high-res digital files, you won't hear, say, the really open treble or the rich mid-range that the 700Fs can deliver. But in my experience, the most significant thing was the accompanying amplifier. The 700F sounded great with the $2,100 NAD C389 I reviewed last time. The music was quick and propulsive and clean, but they stepped up to a whole other level in terms of drama, richness, engagement, and sound staging with the $4,500 Rogue Audio Kronos Dark tube amplifier I'll be reviewing in an upcoming video. Now, logically, you'd expect a more than twice as expensive amp to sound better, but what was interesting was that I didn't experience anything like that transformation when listening to the same 2 amplifiers through the Golden Ear BRXs. So this was just a happy synergy, albeit one I couldn't predict, but I will say that if I hadn't heard the 700Fs through the Rogue Audio tube amp, I wouldn't have realized just how capable these $1,800 speakers are. So if you're tempted to think the relatively inexpensive Paradigms won't be a good match with more expensive components, you might be pleasantly surprised. All in all, the Paradigm Premier 700F is a very capable, very easy to listen to speaker. It's quick, clean, and natural sounding, and its only real limitation is that it won't produce deep bass. But that's going to be the case with many speakers of this side, and the trade-off is that they don't take up as much space in your room and don't need to sit as far away from the front wall as bigger speakers. So if this sounds like a speaker that fits your requirement, don't hesitate to audition the 700F. And if you buy a pair, know that not only will they sound good now, they're still going to sound good over time as you upgrade the other components in your system.